The following Conscious Consumer Network recording of a live broadcast is available to purchase in high definition at ethymarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a CCN pledger. For €10 a month, you can have unlimited access to CCN high definition downloads at ethymarket.com. Ethymarket, the ethical marketplace for conscious consumers. Each life we incarnate into has a divine purpose. For the majority of people on this planet, their purpose has eluded them. We have become so distracted with the struggle to survive that we have forgotten what we are here to do. In alignment with the sacred laws of nature, the ultimate purpose of all existence is to create and evolve. We certainly do not incarnate into life with the intention to destroy. And yet, we have come to live in a very destructive world. As a result, there are many out there who feel lost or adrift, whilst knowing deep down inside that something is very wrong with their reality. Many people wish they could do something of value, anything that is purposeful, instead of having to submit to a system of slavery in order to survive. It is important never to let go of that feeling. That is your soul crying out to you, telling you that your life has value and that you do indeed have a purpose. The most important thing you can do in life is to recognize your purpose, and often that requires a lot of soul searching. Life indeed dishes out some pretty tough challenges, which will either move you closer towards your purpose path, or will give you great training for when you finally realize what it is that you came here to do. But more often than not, the very clues about your life's purpose are hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of our existence. But we are so easily distracted by irrelevant details that don't really matter, that often we miss the very obvious right in front of us. It is because of our willful ignorance of anything that does not fit our preconceived ideas that the truth about the nature of our reality is so readily hidden in plain sight. This is a very deep and personal journey, which has come to be expressed in many aspects throughout my life. This is not just an attempt to retell a bunch of research and pass it off as my own, for I am very grateful and openly acknowledge all the many wonderful people that I have been given the opportunity to work with and to learn from in order to get to the point where I've come to know what I now know. This is a journey I was always destined to go on, and likewise, how I have come to know this information forms as much a part of the story as the information itself.
Your life
Good evening, everybody. This is Conscious Consumer Network Live, and my name is Mel Ve, and this is Dragonology. Of course, we dive headlong into season 2 with episode 3 of the series. So, for those of you who are familiar to Dragonology, welcome back. And for those of you who are perhaps new to the season and the episodes that we put out here on CCN, welcome. And hopefully, this will be informative for you. Just to say hello, a big hello from my cat princess, who will be joining us tonight to learn a thing or two. No jokes. She likes to participate too. So please bear with me if she wanders in and out. Try not to get too distracted. Okay. A little bit of an introduction, just to keep it sort of all-inclusive for those who perhaps are new to this. We try always to go at this as a simple, linear fashion as possible and try to string as many bits and pieces together for people so that they understand exactly why it is what we do in terms of teaching Dragonology and how important it is for us to get a grasp of the concepts that are portrayed in the series. One of the key aspects to decoding the matrix and thus deprogramming from the artificial construct based in our dragon-created languages is the ability not only to read letters and words, even if they are in different languages, but also to be able to read symbols and symbolic representations, which are in and of themselves their own unique language of expression. Symbols have historically always been used as a mechanism of subterfuge to mask the existence of the dragon. Grasping the meaning of symbols is key to grasping the nature of the web of deceit that binds us in a system of enslavement. Okay, so we're going to start with the very basics and cut to the chase quite quickly. So pay attention, this is going to go pretty fast. But starting with the most basics of what I would consider the first and most common symbol you would come by. In fact, this symbol is so familiar to me that I actually, when I was 18 years old, had this particular sun tattooed onto my ankle. I love the sun, and I grew up on the beach, and I always thought of myself as a sun worshipper, not realizing that it didn't mean that I like to have a good tan, but rather that I was sort of paying energy into odd symbols that have deeper meanings. But I used to wear necklaces with these kind of suns on them, and it's just interesting to see how people get indoctrinated into wearing these symbols without actually knowing the deeper allegories to them. In fact, this symbol turns up in quite a few of my paintings as well. That turned up in the mid-90s that I was doing back then, and actually turns up on a painting that ended up on the cover of my book, The South African Guide to the Global Conspiracy. And for me, when you start talking about symbolism, the first place to start is sun symbolism, because it is so all-encompassing and covers so many aspects and is such a multi-layered allegory that it kind of really needs to be explored on a much deeper level. So, symbolic representations of the sun, sometimes anthropomorphized. Now, anthropomorphized obviously means with human-like features. In this case, sun, nose. The sun's got two eyes and a mouth. So something that perhaps isn't human, given human-like features, means it's anthropomorphized. And of course, the sun is multi-layered symbolic allegory. And it's actually a hybrid symbol, which, like all symbols, masks the existence of the dragon. The sun symbolism allegory is so complex that even some of the most highly ranked secret society initiates don't fully grasp the full meaning. So I'm going to take you through a few contrasts and contradictions with regards to sun allegory, and particularly with regards to the way in which the duality of the sun is played out. Now, just in what we know, let's always start with what we know. The sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. And just within that basic concept, which is a given of day-to-day life, some people wake up in the day and go to sleep at night. And there's rhythmic cycles that are very much dependent on the sun and the light and the dark. And this is an intricate part of everybody's life on this planet. So let's
have a look at how that basic meme, how the very cycle of day and night, okay, contrasts as a conflicting and opposing duality. All right. Sunrise, effectively, which happens to the east, is symbolic of birth or resurrection after a supposed death, and then a rebirth as the sun comes up every single morning. And then, of course, sunset is, of course, cognizant with death or descent into the underworld. And then, of course, the next morning, it rises again, which is, of course, symbolic of resurrection. And this cycle is so deeply ingrained into the fabric of cult culture that it's kind of very difficult to explore mythology or cultural anthropology without really understanding the basics of the elements within nature which played into daily lives and form part of ritual, symbol, and the various different layers of allegory that have sort of been interpreted and reinterpreted through various languages over the ages. So trying to break that all down to languages and labels that we understand in this day and age is obviously very difficult because concepts and ideas are extrapolated and evolve with each and every culture. So we obviously have to try and bring it down to its most common element. And of course, a common element, no matter what language you speak, no matter where you are, you understand the concept of sunrise and sunset and day and night. So we start with the basic elements and we go on to explain how they build up. For example, things that are associated with the sun, very basically, of course, anyone, even a child, is aware of this. Light is associated with the sun. One can say the sun is bright, and you can't often stare at the sun without wearing sunglasses or without hurting your eyes because it's so bright. And of course, it shines, gives you a sunburn or a suntan if it's warm enough. And of course, the sun is depicted as fiery, this fiery ball of, energy that gives off heat. You can definitely feel the sun heating your skin when you're in it. And of course, energy, just think of solar panels. They get energy from the sun, solar energy. And of course, the generation of life, the warmth from the sun brings the plants out of the ground in spring. And of course, the sun is inextricably linked with the zodiac, because what the zodiac effectively is a symbolic representation of how the sun's travels is tracked through the galaxy over the course of a year. And that's really what the zodiac represents. And of course, the sun has also been represented by the lion. Lion is a solar symbol and masks sun symbolism, but it's also a symbol of the dragon. And of course, there are the sun gods. They turn up in every single religion, solar messiahs, sun god, creator gods. You just can't seem to escape them. And they seem to kind of have just changed names over the years, but ultimately represent the same solar deity, much like Jesus does. And then, of course, there is the last symbolic allegory, which very much is important to understand, and that is that the symbol of the sun masks the dragon. And let's go on to explain how that ties into our language. All right, so the sun's not always seen as bright, and this is what we're talking about, the duality. It's not always seen as bright and light and white and all of that. It's also seen in its opposite representation, such as the black sun, which you find often in things like alchemy. There's references of the black sun. And of course, the Jesuit symbol is a representation of the black sun. And you'll notice here in the Jesuit symbol, you have the cross with the IHS, which we shall go on to. The IHS in different religious iconography, all right, this is actually stands for Isis, Horus, and Seth, and we'll get into that a bit more. But what's interesting to note is that the Egyptian Holy Trinity of Isis, Horus, Seth, IHS, turns up not just in what I consider to be Christian iconography, showing that ancient Egyptian mystery religions just changed names, but actually the actual concept of it transferred through to Catholicism and Christianity. But you can also see this here, because what you've got is an interlocking six-pointed star. Now, some people would say that, perhaps that is what is now used as the Star of Israel. But an interlocking star, much like this one, is actually more commonly a pagan occult sign than it is a Jewish sign. In fact, the symbol of Judaism is the menorah. It's a very strange story as to how this became the symbol of the Jewish faith, but it's not originally a representative of the Jewish faith. However, you do find these turning up quite a lot in Catholic cathedrals, and I've seen them all over Europe, actually, the six-pointed star, the interlocking ones. Again, giving indication that all religions are ultimately based in the pagan and pantheistic religions, irrespective of the fact that they might consider them to be evil or profane now. That's where their roots were, really. Okay, the Egyptian Trinity in Catholicism. All right, IHS, as you said, Isis, Horus, Seth, three different gods of Egyptian religion or mythology. And one of the most obvious indications that Christianity or Catholicism is rooted in older religions is the fact that the Egyptian Holy Trinity does turn up in Catholic iconography, as we've shown you here. Okay? Religion and ritual, inextricably linked. Through religious behavior, though religious behavior varies widely between different cultures of the world, religion and or ritual is found in all of the world's cultures, almost everywhere. And without exception, in fact, you'll find people who have their traditions and things that they do at certain times of year. And one of the things that I found very interesting in terms of tradition and ritual is how you go and you find these sort of megalithic stone structures all over the world, which seem to be solar calendars and mark out very specific points during the year. These stones are hauled from very far away and they're very freaking heavy. And all to sort of mark out various points of the sun. So the sun ties in inextricably to these sun temples and also into ritual, which seems to have been performed at certain times of year, specifically in relation to the solar cycles. And of course, sun rituals and solar cycles is the very basis of religion. The fact that Jesus is in fact a solar Messiah is, I suppose, the best example of that. Again, as we were speaking about earlier, day and night is played out in the Egyptian mystery religions as a battle between the sun god Horus, who's always depicted, who's sometimes depicted, I should say, with a peregrine falcon head, and of course Seth, who is sometimes depicted with a sort of like dog-like face. Okay, and of course, Seth is supposedly the god of darkness in the underworld, and it's kind of a repeating cycle. They're continually at war with each other. And in the day, Horus is the one who's winning until you get to about sort of midday, and then Horus's strength starts to wane as Seth takes over and night sets, and then Seth is supposedly the winner for a while until he battles Horus all night, who then is supposedly begins to beat Seth, and then when the sun rises, Horus is supposedly the victor of the battle. And this is the whole cyclical story of day and night in Egyptian mystery religion, all based around one very common theme. That's battle and conflict, war. They're constantly battling each other for domination. And what's interesting to note is it's never always day and it's never always night, meaning they're constantly moving between 2 points of duality. But this 2 points of duality can only be met through a measure of conflict, contrast, contract. All right, the sun sets in the west, obviously. We learn this is one of the most basic things at school. And of course, the sun rises in the east. But the sunset in the west is what we're going to be focusing on today. And what's interesting to note is that when we covered this off in last week's Dragonology, is that West is symbolically cognizant with death. Okay, and this is very much evidenced in the Indo-European languages when you start looking at the words that kind of tie in together and very similar to each other, such as Occidens, which means setting of the sun. Of course, the sun does set in the West. Occidental, which refers to someone from the West or a Westerner. Okay, there's a very famous fashion label called La Occidental, which means the Westerner. And Occidental actually means to kill. Now, if you look at the red highlighted sections in each of these three words, you've got the side, which is also a root that you find in genocide and suicide. So it's interesting to note that the word for setting sun and someone from the West also is a word for kill, murder, massacre, or slay, as depicted by its more common or more obvious interpretation with Occidental. Okay, human sacrifice. Yeah, not a very pleasant thing. It's a very specific thing, and the whole point behind ritual is anything that happens at a specific place, at a specific time, for a specific purpose. Okay, those three elements have to be defined, and this is very commonly marked in many cultures of the past by the act of sacrifice. And tonight we're going to be talking about that, okay? Talking about, as we say, we've gone from the duality and we're now focusing on the dark side of it, of what happens for these dark rituals, for the black sun, in honor of that sort of really sort of patriarchal, unnecessary element of life that, you know, it's a bit unnecessary to happen, and it happens on such a broad scale that most people don't even realize that people are being sacrificed every day, you know, to the pharmaceutical industry. Just by funding them through taking their drugs, they sacrifice themselves and their health, for example, whilst, you know, making billionaires even more so billionaires. And this is a concept we have to get our head around, because human sacrifice, although a very specific thing when done in ritual and in full knowledge of everybody, we're all sitting around watching someone being murdered for the specific purpose of a ritual, you know, which is very sort of in your face. Well, not really, it's kind of done covertly, but those who participate know very much what they're participating in. Whereas there's also the case of human sacrifice being done to all of us without us even really realizing it's being done to us. And this is what we need to do, is bring awareness to the entire paradigm of sacrifice, which is where we're going to go next. Human sacrifice is one of the oldest known ritual practices, and human sacrifice is defined as the act of killing one or more human beings, usually as an offer to a deity as part of a religious ritual or ceremony. Human sacrifice has been practiced in most cultures throughout history. So it's not just a brutal random thing that they like to do to people they don't like. In order for it to have been so prevalent, it must have been important. There must be something to it. Okay, and there is. Of course there is. It's all about the energetics and about the soul. As you can see here, more examples. This is actually from a Greek krater, an example of sacrifice. And I'm not even sure what culture this is from, but in fact, it's so unclear that I couldn't even tell you. But just to give you an idea of sort of how widespread this kind of thing was. I mean, what is the psychology of the human being that they think it's okay to sort of slit people open and rip out their hearts or do whatever it is they need to do? You know, how detached have we become from our humanity that we engage in this kind of barbarity? Well, I certainly don't, but I do have to wonder kind of why. And, you know, there's magic in the world, and it can be practiced in other ways other than to engage in sort of bloodthirsty blood rituals. Again, just from all over different cultures. This is Mesoamerican, very distinctly. This is, I think, from a codex, the South American Incan codex, and South Mesoamerican art, to give you an idea of sort of how it's portrayed very blatantly. They're not hiding it. They're doing it. The portrayal of it isn't even very symbolic. It's very clear as to what they're doing. However, it does get symbolic, and we go into that in a bit as to how they hide human sacrifice behind various symbolic allegories. But yeah, just more pictures of the prevalence of it. You won't believe how many pictures, how many different cultures, how many different styles of human sacrifice there are to be found on the internet. Pretty disturbing, actually. So to understand a little bit more about sacrifice is probably a good place to start, because this is a concept that we just kind of become ingrained in environmental, socio-psychological fabric of our existence, that we don't really question it, okay? But sacrifice is actually an artificial thing. No one really needs sacrifice anything in a world of abundance, if you think about it. And in fact, the act of sacrifice is based on giving up one thing for another. All right. So, for example, Lent, which is a Catholic seasonal holiday. I remember the Catholic children used to say, "Oh, for Lent, I'm giving up chocolate as sacrifice in honor to show their dedication," or whatever it was for. That whole concept of sacrifice is ingrained into the human psyche as necessary and relevant, when it's absolutely unnecessary and absolutely irrelevant, because there is abundance on this planet. When you know that, there is no need to sacrifice to anything in order to gain just for the purpose of survival or getting ahead. In fact, it is this very act of sacrifice upon which people have been, preyed upon. And, things like the Faustian Pact or the deal with the devil is predicated upon this need. Okay, we'll give you riches and fame and fortune, but like you have to sacrifice your soul to us and serve us, kind of thing. Why should we have to do that? Why can't we all just live in abundance and in peace and in happiness without having to sacrifice for the very basics? The binding of Isaac. All right, now this is, for me, one of the clearest symbolic allegories of how they've hidden sacrifice in the Bible. All right. So this story is about Abraham sacrificing his son Isaac on Mount Moriah. It's also known as the Akedah. And this is a story from the Hebrew Bible. And the story goes that God commands Abraham to sacrifice his son. And the account says that Abraham bound his son before placing him on the altar. And it's a very specific thing, this theme, the binding of Isaac. You find this coming up quite a bit. If you Google it, you'll find various pictures of the binding of Isaac. What's interesting to note, the binding element of this references contract, of course. And much like the word religion means religare, which, I beg your pardon, religion comes from the word religare, which means to bind, like moor, as if you would moor a boat or bind a boat to a post. So binding is always about the contract. You're bound to a contract. Contractually binding, you've heard that expression before. The reference to the binding of Isaac is an indication of the secret votive sanctified through the contract or covenant. Now, we covered this off previously in Dragonology in 1 and 2. The covenant of salt is a very important concept for you to get your head around. So please, if you haven't seen it, do go back and watch it and understand how it's very clever, very pernicious, this whole concept of sacrificial, contractual, or contractual sacrifice that we've kind of been put in the position of having to engage in. Anyway, the Akedah. This is a very old mosaic on the floor of the Ben Alpha synagogue this is built in the 5th century and is located at the foot of the northern slopes of Gilboa near Beit Shean in Israel. So this is a very old synagogue in Israel. And basically the Akedah here depicts the binding of Isaac as well as the ram in the thicket. Now, this is very interesting because in the story, let's see if I've actually got the slide. The ram in the thicket, the figure of the ram in the thicket, which is a ram caught in bushes. Okay, here's Isaac sacrificing his son with the ram caught in the thicket. The figure of the ram caught in the thicket is named after the passage in Genesis 22, verse 13, where God orders Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, but at the last moment, an angel stopped Abraham, telling him, "Do not harm the boy and do not do anything to him. For now I do know that you are God-fearing." This is interesting. Okay, we are meant to fear God, and God will test us to make sure that we are fearful of him. Now, that's, of course, in a natural concept. But anyway, because you have not withheld your son. In other words, you've not withheld your son from the sacrifice which was requested. And which is interesting here was this, at that moment, Abraham looked up and saw beyond him a ram caught in the thicket by the horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. Now, we've spoken about the concept of a burnt offering. The word for burnt offering is, of course, holocauster, as in Holocaust. So all these words tie in to ritual immolation or sacrifice. And what's interesting to note is this particular version in the Bible says that Abraham didn't sacrifice his son. And some versions actually say that Abraham did sacrifice Isaac. But the ram actually has become the allegory. What they try to do is they change the story. They rewrote it to say that, no, he went and sacrificed a ram instead because, we don't want to really sort of give the idea of what was really going on, that he actually did sacrifice his son to God, because that could freak people out, even though that's probably what happened if it was really real. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. Now, this is interesting because, as always, you need to look at the evidence. Proof is in the artifacts, cannot be denied. When you dig these things out of the ground, you kind of have to go, ooh, all right, hang on a second. So this is an artifact. The graves found during the excavations of the ancient city of Ur, which is a city in Babylon, Abraham's birthplace, have subsequently revealed many elaborate objects. And what they found was this, actually two of them, a pair of these gold leaf and lapis lazuli rams in the thicket. Okay. Now it's interesting to note that these rams are feathered or winged rams, indicating the angels or dragons. All right. If you're not sure of this, please do go back and watch previous Dragonology episodes, season 1. But as you can see, beautiful. Look at this, absolutely beautiful old antiquity here of the ram in the thicket. And it's rather large. It's a sort of human size almost. So this one's in the British Museum. There is a second one. It's in the museum somewhere in the United States. It's actually a pair of them, and they were fully restored after being dug out of the ground. Imagine finding these guys in the ground. Makes me want to become an archaeologist. Anyway, what's interesting to note, not to digress, is that the ram of Amun, which we covered off last week, is also feathered, okay? Much like, rams aren't feathered, much like this one. The ram in the thicket is depicted as feathered. Yeah? So the Egyptian god Amun is represented as the feathered ram as well, much like Abraham. The story of Abraham with the ram in the thicket is, the old artifacts are found showing feathered rams. So rams don't come with feathers. Interesting. So it's interesting they've both been depicted like that, because that's very clear symbolic allegory. All right. In fact, what's interesting to note is that the word feather and father are very closely linked. which again brings on the whole idea of predominant patriarchy that sort of brought about these unnecessary blood rituals. Anyway, doctrinally, the slain ram symbolizes conflict, and this is personified as the falling, dying, or setting sun. And we went into all this etymology last week just to cover it off a bit more. And of course, ram and lamb are very similar to each other. The am obviously is another Hebrew word for nation, which is very interesting. But the Amun ram, or also lamb, and here's a depiction of Amun with his ram's head. Theologically, Amun, the god of darkness, okay, we're talking about Seth and Horus, of course, god of dark, god of light, the underworld, all ties in. Theologically, Amun, the god of darkness, is paired with the reification of the innocent lamb. All right. Again, we spoke about this with Horus and Seth, the duality, the innocence and the darkness. Etymological comparisons suggest that the propagation of the hidden rites of sacrifice defined through ritual, Amun's nomenclature is switched in the old Semitic language with Amu, which means Westerner. So this word Amu is often what is used instead of Amun. Okay, so they drop the N, Amu, that's how they say it. And this can also mean Westerner, which is very, very interesting. Again, referencing the Westerner priesthood as a death cult, a cult of death, celebrated the dying sun because it was all about darkness. Westerner ram. Amu, meaning Westerner, is taken from the hieroglyphic spelling and is sometimes transcribed by some academics as Ramu. So that's interesting, that the word for Amun, which is Amu sometimes, also means Westerner and is sometimes translated as Ramu, which is also what Amun is sometimes depicted as. See, all these things are convoluted and tie into each other. It can't just be coincidence. Anyway, ram nation. The Hebrew word am means nation, and the ram's horn is very, very important as a symbolic piece within the Jewish faith. Lots of different stories go on about the ram's horn, the blowing of the ram's horn as part of ritual. Okay. Grief of the Arab, I beg your pardon, grief of the war. Grief of war. Jumping ahead. The Arabic etymon ram means grief, okay? R-A-M-M. That's very interesting because you have a lot of this kind of thing coming up, like fury, anger, pain. All these words are rooted in dragon etymology. What's interesting to note is that ram, obviously, means grief because it ties in with a few other things. For example, the symbol of Aries in the zodiac is represented by the ram, and Aries is extracted from the Greek idiom Aries without the I, which means conflict. So the ram is symbolic of human sacrifice. In Egyptian Arabic, the connection between ram and human offering is reiterated in the following wordplay. The sacrificial placement of ayal, meaning ram, upon the altar connotes the wordplay ayla. I'm not very good with Arabic, so my apologies. So ayal, meaning ram, and ayla, meaning family. And these two words, ayal and ayla, in Egyptian Arabic are phonetically cognizant with each other, all right? Which again shows that the family of Abraham, being his son, being replaced by the ram actually probably meant that he sacrificed his son. This is what this is actually pointing out here. What's also interesting to note is that the Hebrew noun ayel, meaning ram, is phonetically cognizant of the epithet Halel, meaning Lucifer. And of course, Lucifer being the fallen angel brings us onto a theme of the fallen ram. And depictions of the fallen ram often depicted as bound. Now, you find so many depictions of them being bound, again, symbolizing the covenant or contract. That's what the binding symbolizes, okay? The covenant of contract sanctifying the sacrifice. Of course, the fallen ram first appears as an ancient Babylonian sign and is later associated to the patriarch Abraham. And of course, the ram is a symbol of child sacrifice. Do not mistake that. Whenever you see the symbol of the ram coming up in mythology, that's really what it's referencing. It's a very convoluted allegory towards child sacrifice. This is why they talk about sacrificing the ram. It's to mass sacrificing children. Human sacrifice, in context to angel veneration, is secret and closed to uninitiated people. Okay, the true meaning of all of this is only really known by the initiated, the priests, and of course those that they invite into the inner circles. In Babylon, the ram was a covert symbol of child sacrifice, which is why the ram became such a widely used symbol, and why you often find ram and goat's heads on things like Pan, and why that sort of symbolic allegory evolved as it did, because ultimately it is referencing child sacrifice. And of course, sacrificial feasts. The concept of feasts and festivals are rooted in ritual sacrifice, okay? And this is evidenced by the similarity of the words fetus and feast, all right? No jokes. Much like the ram in the thicket was a substitution for Isaac, so the concept of the scapegoat corresponds with the idea of substituting an animal for the purpose of sacrificial atonement. So the scapegoat, the word scapegoat, I should say, is derived from escapegoat. So if you want to, for example, escape punishment, you would say, I did something bad and I didn't want to take the blame. I picked somebody else and blame them, and they'd, for example, get fired from the job instead of me. They became the scapegoat. And it's so that I can escape blame and punishment. So basically, the whole concept of the scapegoat is further allegory and indication of the belief that in sacrificing a goat or a ram or an animal, you can escape punishment for your sins, okay? Tragedy. And this, of course, whole idea of the scapegoat, the allegory is further extrapolated in when you start looking into what tragedy, now look, obviously we talked about tragedy, you know, all these words kind of link into each other. The word tragedy stems from the Greek word tragos. And tragos, of course, means goat song. All right? We spoke about this in season 1 of Dragonology. So this shouldn't be new to those people who are familiar with Dragonology, that much like you've got punishment and all these dark things here, tragedy stems from the word tragos, meaning goat song. The hidden votive. Sacrificial offering was seen as a repayment of sin. Okay? So a sacrificial offering was seen as a repayment of sin, and this is often done, and you can see here, by sacrificing. This is at the sacrificial lamb, and looks like the same picture as before, but notice it hasn't got the horns like the ram. This is the lamb again, bound. And the fact that it's got flowers here shows that this is a sacrificial lamb, because they often put flowers onto the sacrificial platform. So basically, Abraham's deliverance is attained through the killing of Isaac, which he did, but it was symbolically disguised as the sacrifice of the ram or the innocent lamb, the Lamb of God, for example. Repayment of sin. Sacrificial offerings as a means to pay for sins can be seen in the wordplay of the Hebrew word kadosh, which means holy, And the Syrian word kadesh, meaning how many or how much. So kadosh meaning holy, and kadesh or kaddish, I can't say it properly, pardon me, the Syrian's not that good. Kadesh meaning how many or how much, referencing an amount which outlines some kind of sacrificial redemption. In English, sacrificial redemption is evidenced in the coinciding wordplay of prophet and prophet, much like holy, okay, the word kadosh meaning holy, and kadesh, which is a very similar word to kadosh, meaning how many or how much, okay, this corresponds in English with prophet and prophet, all right? Prophet being holy, and then this prophet over here being how many or how much. So these patterns repeat in different languages. So you can see that the concept of sacrificial redemption is actually inextricably interwoven into the very fabric of our language. Isaac the righteous. Isaac is deemed as righteous and is emulated as a holy offering. Okay, why was Isaac deemed as the righteous? You often find this coming up in various bits of literature, that Isaac was known as the righteous. Okay, the word righteous, we've covered this off before, stems from the word rite as in sacrificial rite, and ritual, right? And of course, the rit root turns up in the word write, as in to write with a pen. And we've covered that off and why that's symbolic in previous Dragonology. So do go back and check it out and tie that information into this and understand why we cover off rites and rituals so intensively, because the word play is so important. Isaac, known as the righteous, because he was in fact sacrificed as part of a sacrificial rite or ritual. Zedek. References to the righteous one is quoted frequently in the Dead Sea Scrolls, okay? And the righteous one is often referred to as Zedek. Now, Zedek is etymologically traced from Isaac. Not too hard to work that out. Zedek, Isaac, not too far from each other. So the righteous one turns up in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the reference to the righteous one, Zedek, being Isaac, all right? The teacher of the righteous, as cited in the Palestinian Codex, is named as More ha-Zedek. Now, what's interesting to note is that it was on Mount Moriah that Isaac was being sacrificed by his father Abraham. So in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where it references the righteous one, it actually references the teacher of the righteous as More ha-Zedek. So that's Isaac, who was supposedly sacrificed on Mount Moriah. Prophets and messiahs. Congenial of a messianic figure, Zedek is comparative to Jesus. Okay, the figure of Isaac is absolutely, the Isaac in the Old Testament is absolutely comparative to Jesus in the New Testament. And you'll find lots of comparative and allegories like this. Jacob in the Old Testament comparative to Joseph in the New Testament, and so forth and so forth. In the New Testament, the innocent blood of the ram or goat or lamb, which is tragos in Greek, details the betrayal, okay, tragos, trail, all right, which is trader in Latin, all right, so betrayal is the word trader in Latin, like traitor, trader. A traitor betrays. What's interesting to note is that obviously the most common association with betrayal is Jesus. Jesus was betrayed by Judas, supposedly. But what's interesting to notice is that tragos, which obviously means goat song, is etymologically cognizant with trader, which is betrayal. Firstborn sacrifice. Okay, now this is not just a Bible story of the Exodus where a whole bunch of Egyptian firstborns children were killed by the angel of God. It's actually a very common thing. And the firstborn sacrifice, ritual sacrifice of both Isaac and Jesus, which is played out quite extensively through the Bible in various ways, if not directly, then allegorically. Both the sacrifice of Isaac and Jesus is analogous with the practice of ritual sacrifice of the firstborn. All right? These are anecdotes or incidences or examples of this concept of firstborn sacrifice that has to happen. We spoke about this last week of sacrificing of the first fruits of the season in the teen baskets, for example. Thickets and thorns. All right. Obviously, the ram got caught in the thickets, as we spoke about earlier. Oblation of the firstborn, allegorized as the ram in the thicket or the innocent lamb, is symbolically comparative to Jesus wearing a crown of thorns. The paschal lamb, obviously the totem of the lamb or the trap lamb, parallels with that of the lamb of Passover. Now, what's interesting to note is that this paschal lamb, they talk about slaying lambs and then putting blood on the lintel. It's almost comparative to Jesus being put up on the cross. So there's, again, a lot of comparative allegories because the lintels are made of wood and so were the cross. The ritual sacrifice of Jesus and Isaac is a meta-narrative of the sacrificing of the Passover lamb proportional to salvation. Hence why Jesus is often referenced as the Lamb of God. And also why they turn around and say that Jesus died for our sins. I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing. No one can die for anybody else's sins. You know, we have to take responsibility for our own karma and deal with that. You cannot take responsibility for somebody else's. Well, you can, but why would you want to? The simple fact is that the whole concept of sin is a bit strange, and the fact that someone else died for this strange concept is even stranger. And the fact that it's so deeply ingrained into our culture is even worse. So let's kind of, deconfuse all this fluff and get down to the root of what this really was or is. And in so doing, we deconstruct the program that we've been programmed into. The need for sacrificial atonement to reconcile human sins is evidenced in the fact that Jesus is said to have died for our sins. Okay? So already we're told that, sins have to be atoned for. And in fact, so much so that the Son of God died to do that for us. That is how important this concept of sacrificial atonement is. So we have to ask, really, what is sin? It's really confusing, to be honest with you. To define sin is, very philosophical, I suppose. It's a matter of your perceptions and beliefs as to what is sinful, what you judge or deem as bad. An example of this is that, modern day cultures deem pedophilia as sinful. Yet in ancient Greece, pederasty was rife. And in initiated circles of the church, they see it as a rite of passage. Now, is it a sin to sexually assault young children? It depends on who you ask. Certainly for myself, I think it is. But the concept of sin is different depending on where you're looking at it from. So to have something clearly defined from somebody else as sin and then, be told that you've got to be held accountable to that margin of measure is again, rather interesting. It's just another form of control, really. But sin or original sin is supposed to be the state of humanity resulting from the fall of man, which resulted when Adam rebelled against God, supposedly when he ate the apple or the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. Original sin is supposedly inherited by humanity as penance for the transgression of our predecessors. Now that's interesting. That means to say that, for example, my biological father, who I've met once in my life and never had much contact with at all my entire life, if he, for example, drove a car drunk and hit somebody, that's saying that, I would be responsible for that crime. Even though he'd never been in my life and I probably never knew anything about it, I'd somehow still be responsible for that. Now, that kind of concept just is, even to a child, I think it offends their logic. It's really manipulative, to be honest with you. You can get people to believe that they are somehow responsible for the sins of people that came before them, perhaps many generations before them, and you don't even know what they did that was so bad, or if the story that is told is true. And why is it that we've got to account for their sins, right? Why are we responsible for the original sin that we've inherited? And why do we have to pay the penance for it? Because this is what we're doing now. The concept of original sin is contra to the reality of the consequence through free will, all right? And I very much do believe, and so, Aleister Crowley said it best, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. I'm not promoting Crowley. What I am saying is that the magicians, the magi, the initiated, those who knew how to work with elements and energies, that's kept from humanity now, this sort of sacred knowledge, all right? They knew the truth about the nature of reality. And that is, there is only one law, and that is to obey free will. Of course, Crowley took it to extremes, okay? His free will included sacrifice and all sorts of other interesting behavioral aspects. But in this case, and I'd say a context of wishing to be self-responsible and to seek freedom, all right, we really should acknowledge the fact that there is only one law, and that is to obey free will and not to succumb to the machinations and domination of others. The collective suffering of humanity is based on a predatory need for sacrificial atonement, based on the assertion of illogical blame for the purposes of psychological manipulation in order to program and control us through the mechanism of fear, thus creating very negative and destructive patterns of behavior and severe schisms in the human psyche. Sacrifice and suffering. The concepts of sacrifice and suffering are, of course, inextricably linked, all right? And the reality is, in a world of abundance, no one need ever sacrifice anything. And I give you, I'd suppose, the most obvious form of sacrifice on a day-to-day level. A family decides to have kids, and in order to support the children, both mom and dad has to work. Mom has to sacrifice time with the children in order to earn the fiat currency she needs to feed those children and clothe them, and perhaps she wants to send them to school and get them indoctrinated or whatever. But there is a sacrifice involved for the desires, what she deems best for her children. And it really doesn't have to be that way. As I say, in a world of abundance, in a world where information should be the common heritage of all beings, in a world where food should be freely available to all, okay, we shouldn't have half the world living on less than $3 a day. We should be a world that cares for the sick, the suffering, and the weak and the vulnerable, not relegating them to, having to put them on minimal income and pensions, and then describing them as the scourge of humanity because they can't sustain themselves. And this kind of destructive, pernicious malevolence, which is so pervasive in our society today, that is very much underpinned and underrooted by the whole concept of sacrifice. It really is. Sacrifice is the very dark, dark heart and seed of all the evil that spirals out of the karmic trail of debris that it leaves behind. And this is why I spent so much time on the concept of explaining and examining sacrifice and the relevance and purpose of engaging in this. Because in order to understand where we are today, you need to understand the history and where it's all come from. Now, there's not a single person out there who likes paying taxes, and a great deal, many people think it's rather unfair and wish that they perhaps didn't have to pay taxes, okay? And to be fair and honest, taxation is a modern day version of sacrificial atonement, all right? Taxation is basically a requirement to pay or sacrifice hefty percentages of your sacred labor to various controlling institutions. So let's have a look, just something I grabbed off the internet, took America, for example. Allocation of taxes in 2009 and how they were divided up. What's interesting to notice, and I'll go through this from the bottom. Diplomacy and needs abroad, 10%. Okay. Education and jobs, right? I think that was 6.9%. Government operations, 2.2%. Healthcare, 19%. But what was very interesting to note, I beg your pardon, was actually this 10% over here is interest on non-military share and federal debt. So 10% of our taxes goes into paying the interest on non-military share of federal debt. But 44.4%, that's almost 50%, okay, is the current military spending and cost of past wars. So they're still paying off past wars and current military spending. So it's actually quite a bit more than 50%, because if you add that up, you're looking at about 55%. That's actually really, because you're paying off federal debt and past wars. So 55% of our taxpayer money is basically paying off things that we actually don't really consent to, okay, in the first place. Funding murder and suffering, all right? Your tax money is in the bullets and bombs that kill people. And that's a fact. I love this picture because it's got a whole bunch of people saying, here, war, not with my money, I refuse to pay. People are refusing to pay tax. They are disrupting war through tax refusal because it's proven here, okay? At least 55% of your money contributes to the global war effort. Why is it important to know this stuff, okay? It's important because you are paying for these dark and deadly rituals of mass murder that are killing people and environments and leaving many more to suffer. War is mass sacrifice. The concept of war is based on ritual mass sacrifice. Provable fact. The fact that they use the word Holocaust to describe what happened in Germany, all right, in the Second World War, is fact, is proof that they know that war is ritual. War is profitable, absolutely, all right? Why would they want to stop? In fact, America is a war state. The number one export out of America is armaments. And of course, This is the hard reality. It's particularly hard to look at being from South Africa. It never, ever gets... It's never easy to understand how this is a state of affairs that is allowed to exist, especially when there is abundance on this planet. And this is largely as a result, poverty and suffering as a result of war. Bill Hicks said, "Take all the money spent on war and spend it on clothing, feeding, and caring for the world's poor and suffering, which you could do many times over." Yeah, brilliant idea. Why don't we do that? The covenant of conflict. In my humble opinion, the greatest sin of humanity is the continuation and perpetuation of a state of affairs that promotes conflict, death, and destruction for the purposes of profit. And the utter hypocrisy is evident in the fact that the Vatican controls the world's global armed forces through its armies of knights. That's a fact, okay? All the world's armed forces around the world are controlled by the knights. The Vatican also controls the world's intelligence networks, okay? Fact. The Vatican is also the greatest profiteer from the global arms trade. So basically the Vatican, as it says in this lovely picture, the Vatican promoting peace by being one of the largest shareholders of Beretta Arms Corporation. And of course, while we continue to give our profits to profits, we can never hope to create a fair, peaceful, sustainable world. And that's a fact, folks. All right, that brings us to the end of this week's episode of Dragonology. If you have missed on anything, please feel free to catch up. Season 1 is available in high definition download, and you can get all those high definition downloads of any CCN broadcast from ethymarket.com. Please do go to Ethymarket and become a monthly pledger if you want to watch all of CCN's content in high definition. Everything we do is available on our broadcast guide. So if you are not sure of when Dragonology is going to be aired or when anything else is being aired, we are jumping around quite a bit with the programming. So make sure you check out the broadcast guide and see when everything is. And as I said, do go get a HD download if you have missed anything. We do obviously need you guys to support our network. CCN costs 60,000 euros a year to run, which is a fraction of the cost of mainstream media, which goes through that amount in less than a day. So it's a very, very humble project, but it's reaching very big places, and we're doing it on a shoestring budget, but we don't have that money, folks. We need you to help us. Please do support the Network Support Fund and donate to CCN so that we can keep bringing you shows like this. And, of course, do check out our new look website at consciousconsumernetwork.tv. We had our site hacked last week, but it is back up and running. And, of course, we are looking forward to getting more interesting programming and articles out to you and all sorts of other interesting content. That's it for me, folks. Mel Ve, until next week. See you then.
If you really had to make a difference on a large scale with minimal resources, how would you go about it? Have you ever dared to dream of doing that which seems impossible? On a planet steeped with corruption and destruction, the question beckons, how do we change it? Media has a far-reaching impact on people and has been used to manipulate humanity into our current destructive patterns. In order to affect people into moving into constructive patterns of behavior, we need to construct a new paradigm of media. Conscious Consumer Network has been created with the explicit intention of giving the amazing truth-seeking, solutions-orientated, alternative media a place to fully realize their true potential with a cutting-edge, high-tech professional media platform. In turn, some of the greatest freedom-seeking hearts and souls of our time have realized the true potential of what has been created and have come together to provide their insight and inspiration on CCN. Conscious Consumer Network has become a unique, interactive information and educational network which provides a free-to-view, live-stream, ultra-high-definition channel to the world and features 25 live shows a week and growing with the addition of multiple language broadcasts. CCN has features comparable with mainstream media, such as being able to pause and rewind broadcasts whilst being live streamed. Catch up on missed or previous broadcasts, now available from CCN High Definition Downloads. You can now purchase a high definition download of your favorite CCN show from ethymarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a monthly pledger. This can be done with a monthly pledge of €10, which will allow you unlimited access to CCN's high definition downloads, which hosts a back catalogue of over 250 shows which have been aired since the launch of CCN on the 1st of January 2015. In order to keep CCN on the air, public funding is needed. Please donate to CCN's Network Support Fund or become a monthly pledger. Help keep alternative media in the hands of the people. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.